How do we say that? You know, us donkeys. So that we will not die, for we have added to all of our other sins the evil of asking for a king. Now they're afraid. God's delivered them. They turned away. God delivers them. And then they're not happy with that, and now they want another king instead of God being their king. Now they are afraid because of what God just did. Verse 20. Do not be afraid, Samuel replied, for you have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Principle number 1. When you have rejected God, and you are now coming to your senses, and for some of you, this may be the case today. If that's the case, number 1, turn to God. Now he words it in the negative. He says, don't turn away from God. I'm wording it in the positive. Turn to God. If you're used to coming to God only in these two circumstances that I mentioned earlier. 1, when you want something so desperately that is so good, you know, it just looks good. And of course, we live in a society where everything looks good, especially on television, especially with the new televisions. Man, everything looks great. I got to have one of everything. My father-in-law, he's been gone a long time. He was a great father-in-law. I called him Pop. Because my dad died when I was a kid, and he was the first man, I think, that came into my life as an adult, ever since my dad did. I had a real connection with. But he used to, he got paralyzed in about 96. He died in 98. But when he was paralyzed, he used to watch television. He got that Guillain-Barré syndrome. Some little bug had bitten him and infected him. And he couldn't move well. But he'd watch television, and he would see the most nutty things on late night TV to buy. You know, like infomercials. And man, he would just pick up the phone and he would think his wife, my mother-in-law, and by the way, Betty's at my mother-in-law's house even right now. In fact, they're in church in Salem, Oregon right now. They'll drive about 15 miles to go to church this morning. And they're there right now in another Baptist church, just like we have, but with more people. So not quite like us. But the day will come when we will be like that church. But he'll see nutty things, and he'll think of my mother-in-law, and he'll say, oh boy, wouldn't that be great if I got that for her? So if he could pick up the phone, or if he could get his daughter, my wife, or anybody around there to pick up the phone and call, he would arrange to have something delivered to the house. And he would do this over and over and over again. And all of the stuff was kind of like when my mother-in-law would see it, she'd say, oh, Arthur, she would say, I don't need this. I don't want that. This is nothing that I need. And my mother-in-law was one that kind of put Arthur, Pop, in his place. We see things that we want, and we will go to God, and we will say, oh God. And sometimes we'll couch it in words like this. If you love me, if you really love me, you'll make sure I get a brand new car. I saw a pastor on the street, right? This is what happened yesterday. I see a pastor on the street. I saw Paul Garcia on the street, saw Lee on the street. You know what? These guys are saying they're going to give us some free prayer. And Kevin, you might even had this happen yesterday. I don't know. But if you guys really want to do some free prayer, you know that new car I want, you ask God, right? I saw the ad. I want it. You ask God that I can get it. So we'll have that kind of a thing. That's what my father-in-law would sort of do for my mother-in-law. But if you're in the other circumstance, where life has taken a sudden, devastating turn, you are now driven to God. You're either driven away from Him or you're driven toward Him. Samuel is telling the people of Israel, you have wandered away. You have actually rejected God as king. You've rejected God as anything. And I just asked God to send a demonstration of His power so you'll know who God is. And I'm telling you, step number 1 is, you people need to turn to God. Readjust your thinking. If your thinking doesn't need readjusted, then adjust that thinking. Return and adjust. I don't care where you are spiritually this morning. I don't care how close to God you are or how far away from God you are. I don't care if you've been to church every week for the last 20 years, or if you haven't been to church boy, did we meet a lot of people yesterday that haven't been to church in many, many years. I have said that my dream is that we as a congregation reach people that are not in church, they're de-churched, which means they've been inoculated against the church, they're probably raised in church, and they got inoculated as a kid against it, right? So they know church is not for them. De-churched, unchurched, or people hurt by the church. And how many of us in this room can raise our hand and say, man, I fit in one of those categories? Way too many of us can do it. Way too many of us have been hurt by the church. Way too many of us have not been able to just worship God the way that we really want to worship God. You had to kind of fit into some cubbyhole or some other person's way of thinking. Some other person's approach to how we can do business with God. Or maybe you've been offended, or you have caused offense, and you've been booted out of the church. Who knows? On the street yesterday, we ran into a bunch of those people. I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want it to happen to you. There is no way that you should only be going to God when you want something or when you want to escape from something. Never. Step one. If you've rejected God and now you're coming to your senses, if you've rejected the church and now you're coming to your senses, turn to God and adjust your thinking. Let's go on. Verse 21, do not turn away after useless idols. Those trinkets that we see on late night television. In our society, those things that you see advertised and those things that you want, they're not going to bring you 2 minutes of happiness. They can do you no good, nor can they rescue you, because they are useless. Verse 22. For the sake of his great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. At any one of these we could stop and preach, right? But I want to get to the second point. Verse 23. As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure, step number 2, to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Step 2, fear the Lord. Step 1, return and adjust your thinking. Return to God, adjust your thinking. Step 2, fear God, fear the Lord. I think, can you believe that that's actually happening? I can't believe that that's actually happening. And I got it on silence, and can you figure out how to turn that thing off?